Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, Happy New Year, everyone, first of all. And today is the second day of our new programming, where instead of having a different guest every day, 28 guests have committed to have regular shows on this channel. And today we have Dr. John McDougall, who's going to be talking about the dietary implications of diseases like non-Hodgkins lymphoma. Now, before I introduce him, I just want to say something. I normally, when I have a milestone show like 100, 200, I try to get a special guest. It just worked out in divine order that today is my 1,300th episode, 1,300. So what guest could be more special than Dr. John McDougall? I'm into a little woo-woo things like astrology and numerology. So just for fun, I looked up what the meaning of the number 1,300 was, and it said it's a grand number. It's an angel number. And it said, it's a reminder from the divine that I should be concerned with people who were behind my success, that you would not have made it in life without them. So this is my heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. McDougall, because I believe that my professional success was largely in part to you, giving me so many chances to speak at your wonderful conferences. So thank you so much.
You were a gem that just needed to be uncovered. That's all. You were just sitting there ready to be exposed to the world, Chef AJ. And I'm glad that Mary and I had a chance to give you a few opportunities and to help you along the way. But boy, have you succeeded. I mean, what you've done to change people's minds and to gather a following of really, really intelligent, health-seeking, honest people. You should be so proud of yourself. And the fact that you've been so enduring to do 1,300 shows really speaks for your.
I can't believe it. I mean, that's a lot. That's a big volume of work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, when you're dedicated to something, when you really believe in something, it's not work anymore.
No, I love it. And thank you. Because, truthfully, even before we went to this new lineup, you were coming on once a month. People like you and Dr. Doug Lyle have always come on once a month, whether people knew it or not. But now you've got a permanent place on the lineup.
Well, next month, just to give you a clue, next month, I'm going to be talking about bizarre weight loss diets, which will include, and it was focused on Ozempic, which is your GLP-1 agonists, which are being advertised to death on TV. Everybody's taking them to lose weight. Well, I've expanded that into a whole lecture, which will probably take a whole hour. And I'm going to, I just wasn't finished. I've got to be very careful about getting this talk done because I'm going to be talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of business. We're talking about, the number one sales product for the drug industry, these GLP-1 agonists, Ozempic. They make more money on that drug than any other drug I can think of. You're talking about one of the top selling surgeries in my profession, and that's bariatric surgery. So, I've got to be very, very careful that I put this lecture together for next month, kind of a tease. And I had it ready for you today, but, like I said, I've got to have all my I's dotted, my T's crossed, because, if there's just anybody would ever listen to me.
Yeah. I'm glad you're waiting because, everybody's New Year's, not everybody, but the number one New Year's resolution is to get healthy, or specifically to lose weight. And by February, everybody will be off their plan. So that's perfect.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to have a lot of fun. I am enjoying. I've spent 3 weeks so far on this presentation. But anyway, let's get back to the subject of today. Did you see 60 Minutes last night?
Dr. McDougall, I don't have television anymore. I gave it up 4 years ago.
Well, this would be worth watching on YouTube. 60 Minutes is one of those shows that Mary and I watch every week. And they had a show on Radio Free Europe, which was a very positive show that Europe is getting our broadcasts again. And then the next segment was on the state of our planet. And, finally, it's come to the point where, and if I didn't have something optimistic, I wouldn't tell you this, where the top leaders, the top scientists in the world realize that it's a matter of, well, certainly it's a matter of just a few years before we're all finished. It's not decades. It's not the end of the century. It's happening so fast. And that whole segment, we kind of laid it out for you. and to realize that, people are finally coming to a truth that I've come to a long time ago. And because I've been paying attention, and I don't necessarily have to present an optimistic message, but I'll tell you the optimistic message for all this. I wouldn't focus your attention on the fact that we're failing if there wasn't an option. If you didn't have, one chance of saving our planet, and we do, we only got one chance. And I mentioned it before, and I'm going to tell you about it again. But first, you have to realize, just like with health and diet, you have to realize what you're doing now doesn't work. That's why I've always talked about medicine and its failure in terms of standard medicine, is so that you wouldn't still keep holding out with that hope that you're going to be saved by pills and surgery and your doctor and so on. I had to take that away from you so that you listen to what the truth is, and that is it's the food. And so it is with our planetary health. You got to come to the understanding that we're done. We're cooked, but there's an out. Now, I want you to get your pencil and paper, because I want you to spend some time on this, and I want you to share it with everybody you know, because there's one way of getting out of this, and that is by a website called MEER, MEER.org, MEER.org. I interviewed the founder of this, Yi Tao, last July. So I've been very interested in this for a long time. I mention it every time I come on your show, Chef AJ. So I tell you that you've got to pay attention to this MEER website. This guy's, he's brilliant, to say the least. And he's worked it out so that we understand the reality that you're not going to catch up with the global warming gases. It's too late, folks. We got 1,000 years of global warming gases that we have to recoup before we get back to where we were before 1970. We're done. What we have to do is we have to uncouple global warming gases from planetary temperature. You've got to uncouple those two things, because you can't fix the global warming gas problem. We're going to try. We're going to get rid of fossil fuels. We're going to change everybody to a vegan diet. Those are big deals. They're important. We're hopefully going to be around as a species more than 1,000 years from now. We got to do that. But we're at a point now where we've got to get the temperature of the planet down. And the way we do that is we reflect the sun's energy back into outer space. Think about it. That energy is coming from the sun, penetrating our atmosphere, hitting the earth. What if we just send it back in outer space? And we could do that. Yi Tao has it worked out that with MEERs, covering somewhere between 10 and 20% of our agricultural land with MEERs, that we can reflect enough energy off the planet to cool the planet down so we can save our home. And the nice thing is the MEERs are made out of aluminum cans and plastic bottles. That's the problem. There's no money to be made. There are no billionaires out there that are going to be looking at this project. It has to be from the ground up, just like the dietary issues we've been talking about. Well, I've been talking about it for 46 years. There's no industry out there that benefits. There are no billionaires. There are no bankers. So it's not going to catch on. We're going to have to do it from the bottom up. So you write down this website, MEER.org, and you share it with everybody you know. And eventually we're going to get to enough people, and we're going to get to a realization where we've got to do something. And this we can do, and we can make a difference. Now, that was the second segment on 60 Minutes. The third segment, I got an email from my colleagues at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine within minutes of completing that segment on 60 Minutes. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine, where there are doctors, so like 5,000 doctors, dietitians, other professionals that understand that a vegan diet is what we need to do to save people's health. The third segment was Ozempic, GLP-1 agonists. These miracle weight loss drugs that cost you between $1,000 and $1,400 a month. And you have to shoot yourself with the drug. then you may lose 40, 50, 60 pounds, but they work by making you sick. That's how they work. They cause nausea and vomiting and diarrhea, and they make you so sick you can't eat. Very similar to low carbohydrate diets. Low carbohydrate diets, the keto diets, the Atkins diet, they make you sick. That's why you lose weight. That was the third segment on 60 Minutes. And by the way, 60 Minutes is supported by that particular drug company, one of the drug companies that makes the GLP-1 agonists. Anyway, we got a lot to do, a lot to fix. If we could just fix the weight loss problem, instead of people going for these bizarre programs like keto diets, where you eat food that gives you cancer and heart disease and constipation and bad breath. Why do we have to do that? We don't. There's an option. The option is what you hear on Chef AJ's show. And what I've been trying to teach you, which is a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. Now it's 2023. And I've gone through my days of depression. As a matter of fact, I didn't sleep well last night after I watched the 60 Minutes show. Now, I thought I was over it. I've been hearing it for, 18 years since my first grandson was born. I've realized that we're in big, big trouble with the environment. And of course, I've been working for 46 years to try and tell the truth about health and weight, but it still kept me up last night. Anyway, I thought my days of depression were over because I really feel optimistic about 2023 and beyond. The pendulum is swinging back, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Politics, the environment, fossil fuels, people's awareness of the dishonesty in the drug industry. We're going to catch the cheaters, liars, and polluters, and we're going to put them where they belong. I hope a lot of people listen to this show, Chef AJ, because it's time. The Waterloo is here. It's going to change. And it's because of the communication that we have. I just think we're sitting here talking together, almost like we're in the same room together. 85% of people on this planet have access to a mobile device. The opportunity is here. I am so excited. Yeah, anyway, that's not what I came to talk to you about today, but I just wanted to give you that little introduction. What I came to talk to you today was in the news. And let's get on to that.
Yeah, Dr. McDougall, I did find you can watch 60 Minutes other than on television, and I do have Hulu, so I can watch that episode there, and it's also available on other platforms.
All right. There you go. Well, it's a show we enjoy. Certainly, it doesn't conform with all of our beliefs, but that doesn't matter. And the important thing is that they're bringing information to people. And they certainly brought to me, in light of two subjects that I'm most concerned about, and that's people's health and planetary health. Okay, are we up and going here, Chef AJ?
Looks good, Dr. McDougall.
All right. Well, anybody who is interested in cancer prevention and treatment, I encourage you to look at our website, drmcdougall.com, and I'd focus on the February 2015 newsletter, which tells you that the American Cancer Society has told my colleagues that a healthy diet in the direction that we are recommending should be fundamental in the treatment of people who already have cancer, not just in prevention of cancer, but as a treatment for cancer, because you can change the course of this disease. And it's never too late. The body, you can squeeze some more health out of it. Stay alive a little longer, have a few more better days. And you do it with the food. Anyway, to carry on with the discussion I'm going to give you today, and when I say prevention and treatment of cancer, I really mean treatment. I was a little shy about saying treatment in the past, not the past 5 years, or the past 10 years, but say 20, 30 years ago, I thought my colleagues would come get me as a quack when I talked about diet as an important part of the treatment of cancer patients. I guess I've been talking about this since, the 1980s. So it's been 40 years. Anyway, No, don't have to be shy anymore. The American Cancer Society, as of February 13th, 2015, they came out and told doctors that it's part of the fundamental therapy for cancer patients' diet. Anyway, I want to talk to you about, well, let me give you a little bit of an introduction here. Knowledge is crucial. I happen to be an assistant clinical professor at 4 medical schools. And because of that, I have access to the medical libraries, which you don't have access. If you go search out scientific articles, about half of the articles are open access. So you can read the whole article. The other half, various publishing companies make like $35 a copy when you try and search that article. You can have it, sure, but you got to pay like $25, $35, $45 for every article. I can't afford that. And I bet most of you can't either. But you want access to this information, particularly when I give you the scientific references, as I do in all of my lectures. In the bottom right-hand corner are the studies that I've been talking about. Then you want to find out whether or not I'm exaggerating. Well, is that Dr. McDougall really telling the truth? That what he says is so different than what everybody else says? Could it be? Well, I may not continue being a professor at the medical schools in the future. Who knows? I have a good relationship with at least 2 of them. But there's access that you can have and that I take advantage of right now. And what I want you to look at and write this down is this website, Sci-Hub, SCI-HUB. Okay, there's the link, the email address, or the link for you to, not email address, the link that you have to go to put in your browser, sci-hub.se. And you go there and you put in the scientific article, and there it is. Voila, it appears. Basically everything ever written appears. And the people who founded this particular site, their attitude was the public needs this information and deserves it. After all, most of the research papers that they're selling were paid for by your tax dollars. Now, it's not like you're cheating these people. You paid for the research in the first place. Well, I can tell you, if you go to this website, you can get pretty much every article that I talk about and that I'm interested in. So write it down, become an expert. It's your life, your family's life, and your planet that depends upon you being well informed. And on the left-hand side, I just want you to tell that, I want to go back to what I said in the introduction is, I've been through various phases of popularity of diets on how to get well and how to lose weight, et cetera. And I've been through them all pretty much. In the 1970s, when I first started, Robert Atkins, he was the number one, the Atkins diet, bacon, butter, and brie. You had to go into ketosis. You had to have virtually no carbohydrate at all, which makes you sick. And then you lose weight. Well, I wrote my first book, The McDougall Plan. It became a New York Times national bestseller. So it happens my literary agent, Mike Cohen, was also the literary agent for Robert Atkins. And it got to the point where Mr. Cohen, Mike Cohen, told me, he says, look, I handle both of you as authors, Robert Atkins and you, John McDougall, as authors. I can't sell anybody Robert Atkins. The public has moved on to what you're teaching. And I was so pleased. Yeah, that happened back in the 80s. And that was the way the pendulum swung then, was back towards a high carbohydrate diet and away from these low carb people. In about 1998, my publishers, Penguin Putnam, they came to me, my editors, and I was within the top 5% of sales of the books at Penguin Putnam. I was making them a ton of money. And so they were real pleased to have me as an author, but they came to me, and with a frank discussion, a whole group of them, not just my editor, Michael Hamilton. A whole bunch of editors came to me and said, look, McDougall, we really appreciate you being one of our stable authors. And we want to keep you, but you have to change what you're writing about. Your stuff, these high carbohydrate, plant-based diets, they're passé. You got to start writing about low carb diets. And what I told my editors, I said, look, you're wrong. This could never happen. The science is absolutely clear that these low carbohydrate diets are dangerous. They make you sick. Not just short term where you lose weight, but long term where you get heart disease and cancer. I said, the public's not that stupid. They'll never go for it. And then I told him, I said, I don't do this just for money, although I was making a lot of money back then from my books. I don't do this just for money. I really believe this. So I refused to change. And you know what happened? The pendulum swung. And Robert Atkins became the best kid on the block. You know how it was. And that happened in the year 2000. We were both kind of popular. And then the low carbers took over about 10 years later. And now what's most popular? What are your friends doing? They're doing the keto diets. It's the Atkins diet. It's the Barry Sears Zone diet. It's the wheat belly diet. It's the grain brain diet. Those are the ketogenic diets that make you sick. Well, they may be popular now. The keto, of course, is the name of the game. It's what everybody's talking about. It's the keto diet. Well, it puts you into ketosis. Ketosis occurs when you get sick. Even the words in the title of the books and the discussions are ketosis. It occurs when you get sick. Ketones suppress your appetite. That's how they work. But, and the thing I want you to listen to very carefully, and I do believe it, or I wouldn't be telling you this, the pendulum is swinging back. And I see it every place I look, in politics. I see it in the changing attitude about the environment and about racial issues and intolerance of people around the world. Democracy. I really see a lot of positive things in the future. And there have been times when I haven't. So let's saddle up, get excited. We're gonna win because we have truth on our side. No question about it. And our friends and relatives are suffering needlessly because they've been lied to. But this is 2023, and we're moving on. In the news, Jamie Raskin, who's the U.S. representative for Maryland's 8th congressional district since 2017. Last week, it was announced that he had diffuse large beta cell lymphoma at age 60. That wasn't his first brush with cancer. He was diagnosed as having colon cancer at age 48. Yeah, a dietary cancer. I don't think I have to go into the discussion of how diet causes colon cancer. I mean, good grief. A 7-year-old could figure it out that what you put in your intestinal tract determines whether it's healthy or sick. There's consensus around the world in the scientific community that what you eat causes colon cancer. So, he has the first dietary cancer. Now, what I want to tell you is that he has another dietary cancer. And nobody's talking about it. I don't think you'll find any other guest on Chef AJ's show or any place in the news that's talking about what causes lymphomas. They should be. I mean, this is a teaching moment for the public. They should be talking about it, but they won't. Maybe it's because it's not as common as other cancers. I mean, there are 77,000 cases in the US annually of non-Hodgkins lymphoma. Okay, this is different than a type of lymphoma that has a certain microscopic presence called Hodgkin's lymphoma. They're different under the microscope. And that's basically it. And as far as the diffuse large beta cell lymphomas, they represent about 30 to 40% of the cases. So it's just, maybe because of the popular, they're not talking about it, or maybe they haven't taken the trouble to do even a cursory look at the scientific literature, which I'm going to do for you right now. I didn't have to dig deep. This is the majority of the scientific research that I'm going to show you. And of course, you can look it up now because I gave you access to all the papers, didn't I? You wrote it down. So first of all, let's talk about the treatment of this particular lymphoma. It's done with chemotherapy. It's a regimen called R-CHOP, which represents the first letters of a group of chemotherapy agents. They're poisons. These poisons, many of them were developed during World War II as wartime gases to kill the enemy. And after World War II, these gases, because they killed animals and cells and so on, they decided this would be good to give to cancer patients. But it's been one failure after another, after another, after another, for most cancers, not all of them. In fact, for lymphomas, there's been some positive results, and leukemias also. And testicular cancer, that's another example of how chemotherapy has really made a huge difference. But for the vast majority of cancers like colon and prostate and breast cancer, chemotherapy is a failure. Up until recently, and I have to tell you, there's a new regime that's come out. Now, I want you to look at it. I'm not settled on it yet, but for the first time, they've been able to advertise that there's a chemotherapy regime that'll cause breast cancer patients to live longer, and other cancer patients too. I'm still looking. I'm not ready to talk to you about it. I've had mixed results in the few patients I've sent under this regime. One of them they almost killed, and the other one, not sure yet. Anyway, so you go through this type of regime, and 90% of the patients who have limited disease improve. They're not cured. They have long-term benefits. Maybe long-term benefits that are saying survive for a certain amount of time. With advanced disease, 60% respond to this particular chemotherapy. But the thing to note, and I want to carry this on in our conversation, is that somewhere around half the patients relapse. Even though they may succeed, you may see some benefits for the first few months, maybe a few years. Half the people relapse. And the relapses are much harder to treat. But I have to put in your mind the understanding that these people do not follow a healthy diet. They're never taught a healthy diet. And when I say never, I mean like never. Maybe 0.001% of time. They're taught in their doctor's offices that you ought to change. Nah, I'm exaggerating. It's got to be less than that. But you get the point. They're never given the advantage of dietary therapy in terms of any cancer, much less lymphomas. Now, in 1977, the first article that caught my attention was this one. And I've asked Chef AJ to put this in your chat so that you can look at this article. So it's a little hard to get. You'd have to go through that website that I talked to you about in the beginning of this lecture to pull this article out. But you can. But I tried to make it easy for you. So I downloaded the article, and you could pick it up and read the PDF file on it. It's a very, very interesting article published in 1977. I bet half of you weren't even born when this article was published. And what they said in this article by Alan Cunningham is Alan Cunningham said there were two observations that suggested that overnutrition, especially protein, may be a factor in the pathogenesis. In other words, the cause of lymphomas. First, lymphomas are more common in the upper socioeconomic groups, and others with high food and protein intakes, particularly cow protein. 1977, they identified cow protein. And second, protein augmentation of experimental animals, like rats in this case, increases the number of lymphomas developed. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what Alan Cunningham wrote. Maybe you'll take the trouble to get this article from Chef AJ, and maybe you'll take the trouble to read it, but it's a couple of interesting explanations. And one of the things he says is that the high protein is part of the problem. And he talks about how when you eat a lot of protein, what happens is that protein goes into your bloodstream, and your immune system, your lymphocytes, lymphoma, lymphocytes, these are white blood cells, the lymphocytes have to deal with this protein, and they're overstimulated by all the protein that gets from the fork and spoon into the gut, through the gut wall, into the bloodstream. And now your immune system has to deal with it, and that immune system involves lymphocytes, white blood cells, and through chronic overstimulation of the lymphoid tissue, which is throughout the body. It's it's in every part of the body, every tissue, concentrated in the spleen and the liver. This lymphoid tissue is constantly being bombarded by all this protein from the diet. And so overstimulation causes the white blood cells to deteriorate into a situation where they no longer abide by a basic rule, which you can't go dividing anytime you want. They start multiplying at a high rate, and so you get a whole bunch of blood cells in your system that the body has a difficult time handling. A leukocytosis, in other words, you look at a smear under the microscope of your blood, and you just see a tremendous amount of white blood cells, and they're abnormal white blood cells too. So there's a protein in the food that causes chronic overstimulation of the lymphoid tissues. And then Alan Cunningham, he goes on and says, there's another example out here, and it's a lymphoma called Burkitt's lymphoma. You may recognize that name Burkitt because I talk about Dennis Burkitt a lot, because he's the fiber man. He's the man that opened my eyes back in 1971, opened my eyes as far as there is a cause of disease. Dennis Burkitt told me when he practiced in Africa, he was the head of the Ministries of Health of Uganda, overseeing 1,000 hospitals, overseeing 17 million people, overseeing, I mean, he had a chance to take care of this entire population of Uganda and Africa. Uganda, Africa, who ate, by the way, the McDougall diet, a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. And Dennis Burkitt told me in this noontime lecture in December of 1971 at Blodgett Hospital in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he told me that he didn't see any colon cancer. He didn't see any heart disease. No, he saw one case. So one case of heart disease, and it was a judge that trained in London and went back to Uganda and had a heart attack. He saw one gallbladder disease with gallstones. One. Taking care of 10 million people over 17 years. That was it. No hemorrhoids, no varicose veins, no breast cancer, etc. And I was shocked when Dennis Burkitt opened my eyes. Well, Dennis Burkitt is famous for that, but more famous, he's for a lymphoma that he discovered called Burkitt's lymphoma. Every doctor, every medical student learns about Burkitt's lymphoma. It's common in Africa. It's common in any part of the world where people have a chronic infection with malaria. Malaria is a parasite that is transmitted by mosquitoes, gets into your bloodstream. And what happens is that the chronic overstimulation of the immune system by this parasite, malaria, causes the development of a lymphoma, which is called Burkitt's lymphoma. Okay, so kind of to catch up with me now, what we're talking about is we're talking about chronic stimulation of the system from dietary proteins, causes lymphoma in the general population. Chronic overstimulation of the immune system by the malaria parasite causes overstimulation of the immune system, the lymphoid tissue, which causes Burkitt's lymphoma. Do you see it? Do you get the picture here? You see in the graph here, per capita protein consumption and deaths from lymphoma. Each of these represents a country. You'll read about it in the article if you pick it up. He goes on and he talks about, well, it could also be viral infections. You know, that's a possibility that's discussed in this paper, possibility of viral infections. Well, let's take a look at the research, and this is the majority research. you'll work hard to find dissenting articles on what I'm going to show you right now. And it's current research. Dairy product consumption and risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, meta-analysis, where they look at a whole bunch of scientific papers. And they find that the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma increased by 5 to 6% for each 200 grams per day of dairy product intake. 200 grams of milk is 2/3 of a cup. Meat and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, red meat intake and the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, another meta-analysis. So again, the meta-analysis is just taking a whole bunch of papers, and hopefully they are looked at by people who are not biased. You can run into meta-analysis that you wouldn't want to pay attention to because industry pays for this type of research also, and they can leave out whatever papers they want. But I believe what I'm sharing with you are people who are, good scientists and interested in giving a good summary of the scientific literature. And here's a couple of medical analyses that you can look at. And what they say is there's strong evidence that indicate the consumption of red meat and processed meat is a risk factor in the development of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's particularly the kind that Jamie Raskin has. So there you go. There's meat, there's dairy. And then you'll also find the contrary type of research out there, which shows you that vegetables in particular are not associated with this type of lymphoma. In fact, they're opposed to it. There's a significant risk in reduction in risk of getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma if you eat a diet high in vegetables. Okay, the possible mechanisms involved, they go back to that 1977 paper by Alan Cunningham. In this particular article, it talks about it's due to immune suppression effects of fat and animal proteins and also the lack of antioxidant properties in vegetables and fruits. Let's talk about the viruses for a minute. Viruses cause lymphoma in cattle. There's something called bovine leukemia viruses, which infect 84% of the herds, the dairy herds, and 38% of the beef herds. This is current data. You can find this with the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA handles these figures. In other words, in the US population, there's actually the figures go up as high as 89%. 9 out of 10 herds are infected with these lymphoma and leukemia causing viruses, the cattle. And that's in the US, but there are over 20 countries, most of them European, particularly Finland led the way, that have killed all the sick cattle. They think it's important, but in the US and many other developed countries, they have ignored it completely. Industry has, the cattle industry, the dairy industry. They don't care whether you eat infected milk and infected beef. Well, the bovine leukemia virus is almost identical to the human leukemia virus. It was only in the 1980s that they had instrumentation that was allowed to tell the difference between bovine, in other words, cow, and human leukemia viruses. Otherwise, our techniques were so crude that you couldn't tell the difference. And they were anatomically, structurally, basically the same. And of course, we accept the fact that human T-cell leukemia viruses cause leukemia and lymphomas. That's something that the medical profession is quite happy with or comfortable with understanding. The implication here I want to talk to you about has to do with breast cancer. There have been multiple studies, and I've given you 2 references here, which show that these viruses are involved with breast cancer. In one particular study, the first one listed there is a meta-analysis, 6 of 8 studies that determined that examined breast cancer tissues and DNA found bovine leukemia viruses in the breast tissues. The other review showed the same thing. This is the majority opinion. When you look at the breast tissues, you find these viruses in women who have breast cancer. Probably men too, but of course, it's primarily a disease of women. But there are many cancers that are known to be caused by viruses, like liver cancer and cervical cancer and Kaposi sarcoma and Burkitt's. Another theory is that Burkitt's is caused by the Epstein virus, and it doesn't mean it's not also caused by malaria, but there are people who believe that it's another virus that causes Burkitt's lymphoma. All right, how would you how do you go about treating this? Well, I want to bring up somebody who's a frequent guest on this show, which of course AJ really appreciates his talents. And that's Dr. Alan Goldhammer. He has an organization, an institution called True North. And there you go on water fasts. And they were able to get published in the British Medical Journal an article that discussed water fasting and an exclusive plant food-based diet, which happens to be the McDougall diet, without salt and sugar, in the management of stage 2A low-grade follicular lymphoma, basically the same as the diffuse beta cell. There's no reason to feel that they're any different in terms of how they act, how they respond. The same chemotherapy agents are used for both of these subtypes of lymphomas. So they've had a woman who is 42 years old who is diagnosed as having lymphoma. They put her on a 21-day fast, and the lymph nodes, which are the classic clinical sign of having lymphoma, you have these swellings, under your jawbone, in your abdomen. They reduced in size dramatically. When she left the fasting program, she went on, basically the McDougall diet without salt and sugar. And at 6 and 9 months, there's no evidence of disease. Got published in the British Medical Journal. There are some clinical trials that are going on now. And here's one out of Israel. The effect of a vegan diet and lifestyle changes on lymphomas. During a waiting period, this is a waiting period between the time of diagnosis and chemotherapy. And they've seen some positive results, and they're going to do a trial. They're in the process of doing a trial right now to show to show the rest of the world whether or not it makes a difference. But as I told you, I started this lecture in February of 2015, the American Cancer Society came out and told doctors that a good diet needs to be part of cancer therapy, including lymphomas and colon cancer and breast cancer and melanomas and prostate cancer. The evidence is sufficient to recommend a diet that does no harm, cuts your food bill by 80%, helps the environment, makes you smell better, and gives you a good bowel movement. There's no reason not to do this, except it detracts from the ability to make money. You have to talk to people. So that's my brief introduction to Jamie Raskin's present problems, which affect 77,000 people in the US every year. They get lymphomas. Half the population will have a major organ cancer before they die because of the diet. And people who are unfortunate enough to be diagnosed with cancer, you shouldn't stop there. And it's not just prevention. It also involves treatment. As I talked about, you may get remission from CHOP, from the chemotherapy agents, but half of them come back. Well, what if you took these people, you gave them the chemotherapy, which, shows some clinical benefits, and you put them on a good diet at the same time. What do you think would happen? I'll tell you what I think would happen is there'd be many fewer people who develop the cancer again. There are many fewer cases where the cancer come back. If we put them on a good diet, we gave them a chance of their own immune system fighting things off. But that step is one that's not been taken yet. But it's going to be, because the future is going to be different. We're going to get the truth out, make a difference, change the world. That's what I believe. All right, there, Chefy AJ.
Hey, well, wonderful, Dr. McDougall. And I included all the links in the chat and the show note that you referenced. We sent it out to our mailing list. Do you have time for a few questions?
Oh, I got plenty of time.
Okay, well, you guys, you really have to get those questions to us in advance. However, I am going to take this one from the chat because there is somebody dealing with some cancer right now, and she has a question. Where did it go? Oh, before I forget, thank you to Diana and Susanna for congratulating me on 1,300 episodes and your super chat donation. So Cynthia, who's watching live, says, Dr. McDougall, I've just been diagnosed with enlarged thyroid with 4 or more nodules larger than a 1. As a vegan, how should I handle getting it cured after the biopsy?
Well, there are some standard therapies for thyroid cancer. Thyroid cancer is a very treatable cancer. In fact, if there was any cancer that I was going to get, it would be thyroid cancer. There's radioactive I-131 that has been a standard therapy for probably 50 years. It's still used today. What you get is you get a dose of radioactive I-131, iodine 131. And iodine's taken up by the thyroid tissue, and the radiation kills the metastases. It's a very, very curable cancer. Now, should you at the same time change your diet? Of course you should. Well, where's the downside? You know, even if somebody never shows or never takes the trouble to prove that a diet helps with thyroid cancer, now where's the downside? Now, I had a little bit of an argument with one of my mentors when I was a resident at the Queens Medical Center. Kevin Lowe was his name. He was a hotshot oncologist who happened to be a friend of mine. Our kids used to play together on the playground. You know, I liked him. Kevin Lowe was a great guy, but he was so enthused about cancer chemotherapy until he was put on the spot, which I did several times in public conferences. I said, Kevin, show us the data that this really works. And he could never do it. But anyway, there was a patient I had who had lung cancer. Lung cancer is a very terminal disease. Good grief. Almost everybody's dead within 5 years. Anyway, this patient came to me in hopes that I would help him with his lung cancer. And I told him, you ought to change your diet in addition to anything else you do, which is probably nothing, because the surgery and the chemotherapy and the radiation hurry up your time to die. I don't remember whether I told him that or not, but that's the way it is. Treatments are terrible. The prognosis is horrible. So I said to the patient, you ought to change your diet. Well, the patient went back to Kevin Lowe and told him that Dr. McDougall recommended that I change my diet. And of course, Kevin's response was, oh, there goes the quack again. And he called me up and he says, I heard you recommending the same diet I recommend to you right now. I heard you recommend a vegan diet to my patient who has lung cancer. I said, yeah, why not? I said, at least he won't die constipated. I mean, when something's wrong with you, regardless of whether it's been proven that a diet's going to alter the outcome, you need to be in as best health as possible. Even if you cut off your arm, you still need to follow the best diet for a human being. At least you'll have one arm and you won't be constipated. Anyway, you ought to take advantage of I-131 therapy, and if that's what's going to be offered to you, and get on with your life and get your diet changed. And I don't know anybody that's shown that that thyroid cancer will be positively or negatively affected by diet.
Great, thank you. Right before we logged on, I had mentioned to you that I sent you an article that Dr. Mercola wrote, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about him, because Diana said she read this and was concerned because he's saying that oxalates can cause the very painful, uncurable condition of interstitial cystitis, and that potatoes are high in oxalates.
Yeah, well, part of that's true. Dr. Mercola, they did an investigative documentary on him, and which basically said he's one of the most dangerous people out there in terms of recommendations. So, the general public, the general medical business has identified this guy. He's been measured and weighed and found lacking, to say the least. And I don't think much of him, to tell you the truth. I like the fact that he challenges medical outcomes, but he recommends so much quackery and sells supplements. So I'm not into what he's doing. Anyway, as far as oxalates go, yeah, plant foods are high in oxalates. The research showing that oxalates in any way cause interstitial cystitis, which is inflammation of the bladder, are old, and they're basically people's opinions. There are no studies done that I'm aware of. The thing that you need to know about oxalates in plants is they're all bound as calcium oxalates. So, for example, spinach has a lot of oxalate. Does Mercola say don't eat spinach? That's higher in oxalates than potatoes. It's bound. The calcium or the oxalates are bound by calcium, and they're non-absorbable. They don't enter the body. They stay in the bowel. However, they can go into the body, and they go into the body and becomes really important when you eat a high-fat diet, which maybe most of Dr. Mercola's patients eat. When you eat a high-fat diet, what happens is there's a process called saponification, soap, like SOAP, saponification, where the fat grabs a hold of the calcium in the calcium oxalate complex and frees up the oxalate. And now the oxalate is absorbable into the bloodstream. And this is how you get calcium oxalate kidney stones, which almost all kidney stones on the American diet, they're based on calcium and oxalate. But the oxalate part comes as a consequence of eating fat. And if you eat the kind of diet that I recommend, the oxalates never get into your body. So it's eating fat that causes, if there's any association between cystitis and potatoes or any association, it has to do with the fact that you're eating a high-fat diet. And as I say, the research on that, you can look it up. I just gave you the website. Look up the papers. Start with the National Library of Medicine. Start with the National Library of Medicine, which is pubmed.org, pubmed.org. Start there and put in interstitial cystitis and oxalates, and they'll pull up the studies for you. And they'll tell you that they're old and they're not available. And you go to the website that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation. There they are. There's the studies. You can read them. They're all yours. They're free. The people who sell all these papers are not happy about this, but it's available. It's been up for a long time. I don't think there's any chance they're going to take down this website. But and you read, you see how good the evidence is. Now, getting down to what causes interstitial cystitis. My belief is this is an autoimmune reaction. And I've had a few patients. I've had some that have responded, some that haven't. But I've had a few patients who I've put on the autoimmune approach that I take. What I do is I put people on the basic McDougall diet, and then I put them on a gluten-free diet. And then what I do is I put them on an elimination diet. This is all discussed in my May 2014 newsletter. And that's the approach I would take. And as I say, I've had some people get better from their interstitial cystitis. What happens, I believe, is the animal protein, dairy in particular, but also any type of animal protein. It goes through the gut wall, and we've talked about this. If you want a good review on autoimmune diseases, you just go to YouTube and you look up McDougall and autoimmune diseases, and I'll go through the entire discussion with you. rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, etc. And this is just another one of the autoimmune diseases. And by changing your diet, I think you have a pretty good chance of getting well. Costs nothing. There are no side effects. Then you get to eat potatoes, lots of potatoes.
You know, I had an interstitial cystitis expert on, and she didn't say anything about oxalates. So,
well, there are a few papers out there. I remember that you'll find a few discussions out there, but they're not scientific studies. They're at best observational, somebody's attitude about oxalates. But the oxalates don't get into your system as long as you eat a healthy diet. As I told you, you have to eat fat for the calcium oxalate to break down and to free up the oxalate. It's the high-fat diet that causes the entry of oxalates into your system.
thank you, Dr. McDougall. And guys, you got to get those questions in advance. So subscribe to our newsletter. We give you an opportunity every week to ask the doctors questions, and we have many, many doctors on the lineup. Dr. McDougall, I don't think I've heard you answer this particular question before from Maryland. What are Dr. McDougall's thoughts on endometrial ablation? I follow the starch solution and plant-based diet. I've been scheduled to have this surgery. I'm 46. I'm not overweight. I'm worried by doing this surgery, I'm not allowing what nature needs to happen, and this extra bleeding will pass with time. I had it done at 47. I loved it because and it ends everything.
Yeah, it does. What we're talking about is burning, bifurcation.
Mine was freezing. They froze mine instead of burning mine.
That'd be another way to do ablation. And you're talking about destroying the endometrial tissues, and you bleed from the endometrial tissues. So, as Chef AJ said, that's one way to deal with the troublesome bleeding. And, it's relatively safe. Was it an office procedure for you?
No, it was, unfortunately, it was general anesthesia in the hospital. But, Dr. McDougall, I wasn't following a healthy vegan diet at the time. I was eating my junk food vegan diet. If I had, I probably wouldn't have needed it.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that the excessive bleeding is due to eating the Western diet. And many of you have my book, McDougall's Medicine Challenge. Oh, no, the McDougall Program for Women. We are giving away all 6 of my books before the end of the year on our website. I don't know if there are any available now for free, but they're all relatively inexpensive. And there's a whole chapter 5, on all the things that cause your estrogen levels to go up. Eating the Western diet increases the amount of estrogen in a woman's body by 50%. That excess estrogen does a lot of things. It stimulates the breasts. It leads to fibrocystic breast disease, and also is a big factor in breast cancer. In fact, the biggest factor in breast cancer is estrogen. Whether you decrease the estrogen by taking drugs like tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors, or having your ovaries removed, which all 3 will prolong your life if you have breast cancer. Or you're talking about problems of the uterus. The endometrial lining, every month it grows, and it builds up depending upon how much estrogen is in the body. So if you have a lot of estrogen, you build up a very thick endometrium. And when you shed that endometrium at the end of your period, then you bleed if you have built up a very thick endometrium, because you have high estrogen levels, which are due to the food, and also due to the resulting obesity from the food. Fat cells make estrogen. So when you lose weight from anyway, the Atkins diet, the keto diet, the starvation diets, have your teeth wired together diets, take Ozempic diet, shots, whatever you do, just losing body fat is going to reduce your estrogen levels. And then what's going to happen very quickly, and usually I tell women wait 2 or 3 months after they change their diet, and they should expect results. They should expect a dramatic reduction in the amount of bleeding, dramatic reduction in clot formation. We know that just adding soy protein to the diet of women in their reproductive years, it changes their menstrual cycle. The periods, instead of being, say, every 26 days apart, are every 29 days apart when you add a cup of soy milk a day. So the food has a big influence on your reproductive functions. And, I've just given you a few mechanisms: overweight, phytoestrogens from soy, and a whole bunch of things that occur when you eat the Western diet: the meat, the fat, the lack of fiber. And the list is long. In fact, I could write a whole chapter on it. I did. The McDougall Program for Women, which I wrote over 20 years ago, chapter 5.
Yeah. I love that book. That was one of the first books of yours I read, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And you will not remember this, but this was before we had email. And I wrote you, I had a question about that book, and you actually wrote me back like a letter. This was unbelievable.
Yeah, I still do that.
It's amazing. I mean, This is before we had fax or email, and I read that book and I had a question, and you actually sent me a letter. We didn't even know each other then. That's how amazing you are. But
I've always done that ever since I've been doing this 46 years.
That's amazing. I mean,
a couple of reasons. One is otherwise I'm as lonely as the Maytag repairman, because my patients get well. So I don't have a lot of follow-up stuff to do. I mean, people either get well or they go find somebody else to listen to. So as far as interaction with people, it's not a great follow-up business. And when people write me, I figure that I have an opportunity to give them an answer. And I've been doing that for 46 years now, still do it. And it bothers people sometimes. They think Dr. McDougall has nothing better to do than write me letters. Well, I still have things to do. It's just I have time for you.
That is great. And you have time for this next question from Julie in Raleigh. And she said, Dr. McDougall, I admire and love you and Mary, and I know you've helped thousands of people heal from their comorbid conditions. Have you ever had any patients dealing with chronic viruses and infections like the Epstein-Barr virus? There's lots of us out here dealing with those things, and even following your protocols are not doing the trick to correct these issues. Any thoughts, ideas, or experiences with this? It can be very frustrating and disheartening.
Yeah, Epstein-Barr virus. Thank you. I got the Epstein part right a few minutes ago, but I forgot the Barr virus. The Epstein-Barr virus, is related to mononucleosis, and you can become chronically infected with it. I think for most people, this is just my opinion looking back at dealing with this virus and many patients. I think most people, it's just an excuse. But not in this case. I mean, this person already follows a good diet, and I think people feel terrible. And a lot of people are infected by EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. And, that is blamed for why they're feeling bad. My experience has been is people who have EBV, who are eating the Western diet, who change their diet, they get better. Why? Because it was the diet that was making them sick. The EBV was just incidental and not really the cause of their problems. So if there's any room for improvement in the person who wrote the letter in their diet, I would do that. And I would even carry it as far as the ultimate in taking care of problems. And I've had a few people who've had to do this. The ultimate in taking care of people's problems, you start with the basic McDougall diet, which is starches, vegetables, and fruits. If you need to lose weight, you don't include nuts and seeds and avocados. Fruits are limited to 2 or 3 or 4 a day at most. And as little refined food as possible. We use salt and sugar on the surface of the food. Why do we do that? It's because we want you to eat the food. And if you don't like the food, it's because there's not enough salt on it. So a little bit of salt added to the surface of the food is inconsequential, except for the fact that you're going to like the food. So you start with the basic McDougall diet. The simpler you make it, the better. The more monotonous you make it, the more likely you are to follow it. And then you move on to eliminating wheat, barley, and rye, which are high gluten foods. And there are certain people who get really, really sick. They have dermatitis herpetiformis, which is a skin condition, and they have celiac disease, which is malabsorption, diarrhea, weight loss, fatigue. You're not doing too well. And it's due to damage to the gut caused by gluten. I think it's also related to the Western diet. It's really a very uncommon problem. It occurs in fewer than 1 in 100 people. probably fewer than 1 in 250, and probably only occurs in populations that eat the Western diet. Anyway, you eliminate the gluten as a second step, and then you go on to the elimination diet, which is described in my May 2014 newsletter. This is based on the foods that are least likely to make you sick. They are sweet potatoes, brown rice, taro, a couple other starches, with the addition of green and yellow vegetables and non-citrus fruits, all thoroughly cooked. Why do you cook them? Because when you cook food, you denature the proteins. So you're less likely to have an immune reaction to the protein. So all thoroughly cooked, you're on the elimination diet for 7 days. And most people, if they have a dietary related problem, will be better in 7 days. And then what you do is once you get better, you're sure, you've gotten rid of the rheumatoid arthritis, and you can tell the bowels are starting to heal with your inflammatory bowel disease. And once you start feeling better, what you do in about 7 days. You see, it takes 4 to 7 days to clear the bowel of the food that you hate. So you can't expect to get better for 4 to 7 days. In about 7 days, you usually experience some benefits. Then what you do is once you're really firm on the fact that you've got a place you can go where you can really feel good, then you start adding foods back and you test them one food at a time. And maybe you decide you're going to add potatoes. And you eat potatoes, lots of potatoes for a couple of days. And you see how you do over the next 4 to 7 days. If you get sick, then you put that aside as a food you're not going to eat. If you do well, you decide that that's part of the food you can tolerate. And it's a lot of work. But again, I've had, quite a few patients, certainly not the majority, certainly the minority, probably fewer than 1%, who have benefited from the elimination program. Costs nothing, no side effects. No reason not to do it. If you'll take chemotherapy, if you'll have your chest opened and exposed to stale operating room air, if you'll have your breast cut off, eating the elimination diet for 7 days ain't that big a deal.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Next question. Yeah, so many doctors don't believe that diet will help. There's somebody watching that says their son has brain cancer. And, the doctors don't say anything about diet helping at all.
Again, AJ, think about it for a minute. So think about what I told you of my story of a patient who had lung cancer. And by the way, I think this guy lived a lot longer than he was expected to live. But it makes no sense if you've got brain cancer to eat a diet that makes you constipated, it gives you indigestion, inhibits your immune system. It makes no sense. We're talking about basic stuff that every human being should be doing. So why do doctors recommend against it? Well, the attitude is if you follow a diet, you will be less likely to take advantage of my wonderful therapies. Excuse me, your therapies stink. You're basically not giving up anything. And plus, the recommendation is to do this and that. If this works, do it. If that works, do it. If it doesn't, don't do it. And you have access to the scientific literature. You could go to that website I gave you in the beginning. You roll back the tape. You have the papers. You can be smarter than your doctor. You walk into your doctor's office and you start talking about your problem, and 10 minutes later, if you're allowed 10 minutes, the average office visit is only 7. If you're allowed 10 minutes later, the doctor looks at you and says, hey, you know more about your disease than I do. And you say, yes, I do, doctor, because it's my disease. Why would you expect me not to know more about it than you do? I'm the one that's suffering. Well, that'll put your doctor in his or her place where they belong, and maybe cause them to go learn a little bit of the things that you're trying to teach them. I would hope.
Great. Thanks, Doc. Okay, next question is from Susan. I've been whole food plant-based for more than 10 years. I was diagnosed with osteoporosis in 2020 and further diagnosed with hyperparathyroidism in 2021 and had one parathyroid gland removed. I was led to believe that bone density would improve significantly with the first year after parathyroid surgery. However, the DEXA scan in 2022 showed further loss of bone density, and my doctor has recommended Prolia, which I'm not keen on taking. What are Dr. McDougall's thoughts both on Prolia and worsening bone density while on a whole food plant-based diet?
Well, she mentioned a lot of things. I'd have to review Prolia again to, make some recommendations. But I believe this is one of the calcitonin derivatives from fish. But I could be wrong. So let's just skip that. And you'd have to look at the advantages or disadvantages of this particular drug. But there are a couple of things you mentioned. One is hyperparathyroidism. The parathyroid glands, there are four of them. They're up here, they're parathyroid, they're next to your thyroid, they're four glands. And they become autonomous and hyperactive. Autonomous and hyperactive due to eating the animal food-based diet because of all the phosphorus and the lack of calcium. What it causes, what the parathyroids do is they regulate the phosphorus and calcium balance in your body. And so when you eat the Western diet, particularly the animal foods, the meat, the poultry, the fish, you're eating a high phosphorus, low calcium diet. And the parathyroid glands are working overtime to correct that. Okay, and they eventually become autonomous. And then you have parathyroid hyperplasia and overactivity. And how do you treat it? Well, the standard treatment has been, at least as long as I've been in medicine, to go in and take out a couple of the parathyroid glands, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three. Certainly not four, which is often done, too often done. And then you end up being in a situation where you have to take parathyroid hormone the rest of your life. Anyway, so that's the cause, whether it be reversible or not. I believe it is. I believe once you switch off this high meat, high phosphorus, low calcium diet, that the parathyroids will quiet down. That's been my experience in the very few patients I've taken care of with hyperparathyroidism, is they've done well. And one of the problems because of the hyperparathyroidism is that it mobilizes bone calcium and leads to an abnormal bone mineral density test, and worse so, it leads to weaker bones. So, that's why you're corrected. That's why but it's basically an asymptomatic disease. I wouldn't be in any rush to treat it. All right. In the meantime, as far as, and this is to the general female population out here I'd like to talk to, is that you're going to flunk the bone mineral density test if you're over age 65. About 70% of the time, you're going to flunk the test. You're going to be diagnosed as osteomalacia or osteoporosis. Osteopenia or osteoporosis, not osteomalacia. Osteopenia and osteoporosis. And you're going to be told that you have weak bones. That's not true. The reason you are diagnosed with osteopenia and osteoporosis is because you've lost minerals from your bones, which is supposed to happen. It's a natural, normal thing that occurs as you go through phases of life. When you're in your reproductive years, when you're having babies, when you're nursing the babies, you need an extra 2 pounds of mineral. And the way you get this mineral is it's stored in your bones. The bones are a depot for 2 pounds of minerals. And this is important for you, for the baby and for the breast milk. When you get to menopause, you're not supposed to be having babies anymore. It won't happen. That's one of the signs of menopause is you stop making eggs. You can't have babies, period. Why should you carry around an extra 2 pounds of minerals? Makes no sense. And so you're going to flunk the bone mineral density test. If you want to find the article on this, you go to my website, drmcdougall.com. You look under hot topics. You look under the disease section. And there's a section called osteoporosis. The first article talks to you about how over the age of 65, about 70% of women flunk the bone mineral density test. And their bones are perfectly strong, I mean, most of them. It's just that the minerals are gone because they're supposed to be. Anyway, yeah, you should change your diet if you have hyperparathyroidism. And there's no rush into getting treated. And I would see what happens. As I say, I've had a few patients in my career who've done really well. You know, their calcium levels came down. You know, they've done really well.
Nice. Okay.
And their parathyroid, you also measure the parathyroid hormone levels in their blood, and they're corrected too.
Yeah. Thank you. Lois wants to know if there's anything that can help shrink an enlarged prostate. Her husband's been a vegetarian for 45 years and is otherwise healthy. Vegetarian could imply he's having dairy.
Yeah, it could, or a lot of soy products, which could be bad or good for the prostate. You know, soy has both estrogen promoting and estrogen antagonistic effects. So in other words, it's anti-estrogen and pro-estrogen. Soy is, because it has all these phytoestrogens, and they act, you know, in different ways. Some promote stimulation of the tissues in an estrogen-like manner. Some inhibit stimulation of tissues by estrogen. So anyway, yeah, soy could have an influence on the prostate. Whether it's good or bad, I would guess it's good, not bad, but that's yet to be determined. And again, you know, your point is what kind of a vegetarian diet has he followed for 45 years? My guess is probably not a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables and no animal foods. Anyway, as a part of aging, most men, like 90% of them, have enlargement of the prostate when they're on the Western diet. And the result is that the prostate constricts the urethra, which is the tube that goes from the bladder to the outside world. And as a result, you can't empty your bladder fully, and you have urinary retention. And so what happens is the bladder fills up because it never is emptied. It fills up in a matter of a few minutes or a couple of hours, and you're urinating frequently, small amounts generally. The normal amount of urine passed is 2 to 3 ounces. So when you have this type of blockage, you may end up passing only an ounce or half an ounce with difficulty. And there aren't any easy ways to take care of it. The standard way to take care of it, and by the way, you'll find all this discussion if you go to my website, Hot Topics, and go to the disease section. There's a section on prostatic hyperplasia. There's a whole article I wrote on this. So the first thing you do is you control your water intake. In other words, you don't drink liquids after dinner. And that helps a lot because you're obviously going to produce less urine. You're going to get up fewer times in the night to urinate. The next step that you take is you try some of the prostate herbs that are being sold. Good grief. You know, it must be hundreds of people who have various saw palmetto preparations out there, or beta sterol preparations, which are supposed to cause the prostate to shrink. You know, I've not found them to be helpful. You know, you may waste $30 to $60 on a bottle to try yourself. It works fine. You know, I think it's rather innocuous to take these prostate preparations that's supposed to shrink the prostate. But again, I have not found they work. So that would be the next phase, is to try hormone therapy. The next phase is you take drugs that doctors prescribe. There are alpha adrenergic drugs like Flomax. These drugs, they block some hormones in the prostate gland. They're supposed to shrink the prostate also. They're Flomax. Isn't that a great name for the drug? Alpha adrenergic blockers. The other category of drugs you can take is you can take anti-testosterone drugs. And these probably work best. And but you destroy their anti-testosterone. If you ever had a sex life, it's going to be gone when you start these medications. And of course, the prostate, its size depends upon how much testosterone is stimulating it. So that could be helpful. And hey, if you don't have a sex life, or it's troublesome enough for you to risk taking these drugs, then I'd give it a try. And then the next phase is minimal surgeries, and they have a new procedure out. They use this little splint, and they somehow hold the urethra open, and it's being heavily advertised on TV, so it must be highly profitable. And I don't know anything about these, so I can't go any further than that. Just a new technique that's out there, and seems kind of, it would concern me to have a little piece of plastic or whatever, silicone or whatever they make these things out of sticking in my prostate gland. But you think about it. But again, you got to weigh the troubles you're having versus the risks and costs you're taking to try a remedy. And unfortunately, you're only going to be able to find out after you try it. And some of them are pretty much irreversible. The techniques that I'm familiar with that are minimal surgeries are using laser, which I have a little bit of familiarity with. And they still do that. And also something called transurethral microwave thermal therapy, TUMT. You can look it up. There are people who say they still do it, but it's hard to get this done anymore. I have quite a bit of experience with that in terms of patients, and was extremely effective at giving people relief. And the last thing that you do is a TURP, TURP, transurethral prostate resection. Oh, yeah. I was involved in these when I was a medical student more than 50 years ago. This is where you put the man asleep on the table, and you stick this, it was a steel tube then. There was no flexibility at all. They didn't have the fiber optic scopes back then. So you put the guy asleep, and you stuck this silver tube up his penis, and then you took knives and you cut the prostate. And then to keep the patient from bleeding and possibly bleeding to death, you stuck a catheter with a bulb on it in the bladder, and you pulled tightly so that the balloon would put pressure on the area that you did surgery on, so it stopped the bleeding. And there you lay for the next week in your bed with this catheter pulling on your prostate till the bleeding stopped. Anyway, it's barbaric, to say the least. The only thing that was comparable is where they went through the abdomen, and the doctors would do surgery through the abdomen, just above the pubic bone, and they would go in there and they'd reach with their finger behind the prostate and grab that organ and pull it out, and they put the prostate on the table. I used to be a surgical nurse. That's how I earned the money for me to go to medical school, as I worked in an operating room. I've been involved in probably more than 10,000 operations. And, I was a nurse. I was a surgical nurse. And so I've had a lot of experience in the operating room.
Great. Thank you. Patricia, who's watching live, said she's been having migraines since she was 10. She's now 50. Would a plant-based diet help? I'm perfectly healthy otherwise.
Sometimes. But, AJ, I've seen people who I know follow a healthy diet and they still get migraines. So, that's what I've got. That's the best I can tell you, is give it a try. I've seen people who've had cluster headaches, Horton's cluster headaches, who've been incapacitated, who've changed their diet, and the result was they stopped having these cluster migraines. But I've likewise seen many, many people who have followed a good diet, and they still get migraines. I don't know what the trigger is. There are all kinds of drugs that are out there now that you could take with the onset of a migraine, which blocks the progression of the migraine and relieves a lot of the troubles. particularly the headache. See, a migraine is a typical headache where it starts usually with some type of aura. Visual changes occur. You see a whole bunch of waves out here in your vision, and you can actually kind of go blind. Or it may affect your dependent part of the brain as the blood vessel is being closed in. You may have a numbness, or your hand doesn't work, or your eye muscle doesn't work, and you look, and one eye goes like that. And so it affects many, many different parts of the body, the neurologic system, depending upon the area of vascular involvement. And somehow or another, there are things, I'm sure they're out there, I haven't been able to figure out what they are, that trigger these migraines. And if you take these drugs, they used to be just by injection, but now they're pills. You can look them up. You'll get some relief. But the drugs are, again, I've had the experience where people have told me that they get sicker from the drugs than it's troublesome with the headache. And so they rather have the headache than take the medications. Give it a try. Don't be disappointed if you still have migraines and you follow a healthy diet. There are certain things, believe it or not, I know listening to me, you think that everything is cured by diet. I sound like a broken record, but I do know there are lots of problems out there. Fortunately, they're in the minority that are not helped by changing to a healthy diet.
But wouldn't it still be a good idea to do it? Because then it prevents other problems that they'll probably have from being on an unhealthy diet.
Well, that's one attitude. I've had many gallbladder patients, gallbladder disease, pain, attacks, stones, who've opted for surgery. And as long as the gallbladder doesn't hurt, even if it has stones, you shouldn't have surgery. But I've told them, I said, look, one of the reasons you want to keep your gallbladder intact is that every time you eat poorly, and a high-fat diet's a stimulus for a gallbladder attack. Every time you eat poorly, you get this screaming, painful message about what you did. And keeping your gallbladder could save you from a heart attack or a stroke, because it would make you follow a low-fat diet, which is the time-honored treatment for gallbladder disease. And unfortunately, half the people who have their gallbladder out they're still sick. They still have abdominal distress, and then they get terrible diarrhea. And you want to leave that gallbladder where it is as long as you can. And there are lots of doctors who will take it out. Again, I told you I was a surgical nurse for many years. And during my period of study, and when I was a nurse, the procedure changed from taking the gallbladder out, where they took a 9-inch incision below your right rib cage and went in and cut the cystic duct and removed the gallbladder, usually full of a bag of stones. During this period of time, they developed a method where they could take a couple of tubes, laparoscopes, and they could go in through the abdomen with little tiny holes like this big, and go into the abdomen and take the gallbladder out. Overnight, the incidence of gallbladder surgery increased 400%. 4 times as many gallbladders removed as soon as they developed this instrument. What do you think went on there? Well, from the patient's point of view, it's hardly anything. From the doctor's point of view, it's hardly everything. You make a little money doing these things, to say the least.
Absolutely. Let's see. Ashley says, my sister has swelling in her small intestine, causing severe pain and vomiting if she eats anything other than sweets. She can't tolerate much actual food. How can she wean onto a vegan diet?
Yeah, this is something I have to guess what she has. She has partial small bowel obstruction. She talks about swelling of the small intestine. I have to say that from a clinical point of view, is partial small bowel obstruction, which can occur if somebody's had abdominal surgeries, because after a surgery, say you've had appendix taken out or gallbladder taken out, part of the healing process lays down scars, and the scars make adhesions, which take and often twist and block the small intestine. So intermittently, the small intestine is completely blocked, and you have an obstruction so severe that the food won't go down. So you go to the hospital, and the typical way to be treated is you put a nasogastric tube down into your small intestine, and you suck the fluid out, and you get the bowel to relax, to rest for 3 or 4 days, and then the swelling goes away, and you're okay for a while. The other way that it's treated is the doctor will actually go in the abdomen and cut the adhesions. But, the surgery that the doctor performs at that time lays down more adhesions. Anyways, it's a problem. The typical recommendation from doctors who receive no education on human nutrition, no practical education still. The typical recommendation is to not eat vegetables because they have fiber, with the idea that the fiber gets stuck in the area that obstruction occurs in the small bowel. This doesn't work. And I've had several patients, enough patients to know that the right approach is to eat a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. And what I tell people who have, because they're scared, people are frightened when they have this intermittent small bowel obstruction. They're in terrible pain, they vomit, they have to go to the hospital, they're threatened with surgery. They're really in a lot of distress. So it's not an easy message for them to hear, contrary to what they've been told by every other ignorant doctor who has no idea what they're talking about. And I want to emphasize that if I haven't enough. Anyway, what I tell them is you eat a starch-based diet. Starches are soft. Think about taking a baked potato and cooking it. Okay, you got to cook baked potato, put it in a glass of water, and taking a fork and stirring it up. Can you see stringy fibers in there? You see molecules of carbohydrate. Fiber is not the strings of a broom. It's microscopic sugars, which are very kind to the intestine, never would obstruct anything anywhere. That's what dietary fiber is. If you think it's the strings of if it's the strands of a broom, it's these long fibers that somehow can get stuck in the intestine, then you're not understanding what goes on. So you eat a starch-based diet, and again, the fibers all break up in these tiny little molecules, whether they be sweet potatoes or rice or oats or whatever. They through the first part of the small intestine, they break down to tiny little molecules, which easily pass through. And then what I do is I tell them, even though, think about it. Have you ever noticed, like, when you eat celery, or let's see, what's another stringy vegetable? Maybe, what is it?
Yeah, well, celery, I would think, is the most stringy, right?
Well, I would think so too. But there are others, that chard, maybe stringy vegetables. Okay. Have you ever seen these strands of fiber in the toilet bowl? I never have. Again, even these fibrous looking foods are broken down by the small intestine, but just to be on the comforting side, what I've told people is, look, you eat a starch-based diet, you take your potentially fibrous green and yellow vegetables, and you blend them in a blender before you take them in.
Have you ever heard of a phytobezor?
Yeah, but you have to tell me a little bit about it, because
because that is when I'm not a doctor, but my understanding, that's when it kind of gets all caught in there, the strands of things like celery, and you get like a.
Yeah, I think I've heard about it, but it's extremely rare.
Right.
And
but plants always get blamed, though, don't they, Dr. McDougall? Like when it's E. coli on the spinach, they forget who pooped on the spinach, right?
There's a lot of bias out there. A lot of people love to hear good news about their bad habits. So anything that will allow them to eat their meat, they're going to take and put down the vegans, the vegetarians, but the idea that, see, I'm justified. You've heard my lecture on B12 and all that nonsense.
Here's a question on a hydrocele. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, from Tara. She submitted it in advance. Sorry, almost missed it. She wants to know, could the standard American diet cause a hydrocele in a male testicle and a breast cyst in a female?
Well, they're way apart as far as their position in the body and as far as the cause. Hydrocele, it occurs in the testicle. It occurs when the spermatocele, which is, there's a tube that runs from the prostate to the testicle. The sperm is made in the testicle, and then the sperm has to be delivered to the seminal fluids, the prostate fluids, to make the ejaculate. All right, you guys are with me, all right. Well, this tube, it gets dilated, and the way it gets dilated is from straining. And the primary reason for straining is to move the hard, rocky American stool, which I call a fecal marble. That's where you end up putting the grunting and groaning and straining, which dilates the spermatocele or the spermatic cord, the tube that goes from the testicle to the prostate. And, once it's dilated, it's dilated. You can have it taken out surgically, but it's not going to go away no matter how many fruits and vegetables you eat. As far as the breast cysts go, it's sort of a different thing. This is due to chronic inflammation of the breast tissue. And what happens is the breast ducts, the milk ducts, they get inflamed, scar tissue is laid down, the opening for a milk duct is closed, and the fluid backs up in the milk duct, and you get a cyst, which are never cancerous. They never turn into cancers. There was one time back in the 80s when consumption of caffeine was blamed as the cause for fibrocystic breast disease. I don't believe that to be the case. They don't talk about that much anymore, but you might think about it. I think it's just due to the same diet that causes your estrogens to be elevated, which is the Western diet, the meat, the dairy, the lack of fiber, et cetera. Chapter 5 in the McDougall Program for Women, you'll find that whole discussion.
Great, thanks. This is from Carol. I would love to know Dr. McDougall's opinion on statins and a baby aspirin. My husband had a heart CT scan, which showed a lot of blockage. The doctor immediately put him on a statin, baby aspirin, and scheduled him for a diagnostic catheterization, which showed some blockage, but not nearly as much as I thought. I thought the doctor would take him off the statin and aspirin, but they want him to keep taking it.
Well, the standard understanding these days is that you should only use this aggressive regime of statins and or aspirin in people who have a very high risk of having a heart attack. And this is all a guess, it's judgment. In general, you can say that people who have already had one heart attack or stroke or who have had heart surgery are at risk for another one. So they're in the high risk category. So the tendency today is to treat with a baby aspirin and statins. It used to be everybody got aspirin and statins, but 11 years ago, 12 years ago. If you're looking, again, you look in my website under hot topics, under atherosclerosis, you'll find an article about using aspirin for the primary prevention of heart disease. It used to be everybody was told to take a baby aspirin, everybody. And that's changed now because when you take aspirin, you increase your risk of bleeding. You triple your risk of stomach bleeding and dying. Some people are allergic to aspirin, but the increased risk of bleeding is the main problem. You can get in an auto accident, you can bleed to death. So it's not recommended anymore that people who are at low risk, which is 95% of the over 95% of the population. The people who you would treat for primary prevention. In other words, they've never had a problem before, never had a heart attack, never had heart surgery. So what you're doing is you're treating them, primary prevention. They should not be treated with aspirin. That's the standard recommendation. And one that I've been using, well, you'll read my 2011 newsletter on this. It's the same thing with statins. We used to say everybody should be on statins. In fact, some of my colleagues used to say we should put statins in the drinking water like we put fluoride in the drinking water. Why? Because atherosclerosis is ubiquitous, because eating the Western diet's ubiquitous. No more. The consensus of scientific opinion these days is only those who are at high risk should be put on statins. In other words, we call that secondary prevention. They've already had a problem. They've had a heart attack, had heart surgery. So it is a secondary effort. They should be on aspirin and statins. That's the way I treat people. But the thing is, it's a judgment thing. With this particular woman's husband, the doctor's judgment was based on the heart scan that this man fits into a category of high risk of having a heart attack or another heart attack or the first heart attack. It was his guess. But the benefits, even under those circumstances, are extremely small. But again, you're dealing with the practice of medicine, the art of medicine. This is not a science. This is a judgment. This is a guessing game. The data is so incomplete, you have to realize the doctor is sitting behind his or her desk, guessing based upon his or her experiences and biases and influence from economic influences such as the drug industry, who pays for a lot for doctors' minds, all the way from the sexy drug detail women, usually women, well-dressed, nice looking, ex-cheerleaders, that's their education, who are asked to go and see the male doctors. I don't think they get by the female doctors very well. They probably have to tell the female doctors the science, but boy, oh boy, can they get us men just to have walk in the room. Whatever you say, honey, just tell me. That probably is a little, you'd call me a misogynist for that statement, wouldn't you, AJ? I meant it as a joke.
No, that's fine, Dr. McDougall. Oh,
You remember introducing me to that term?
okay. You have a memory like you should go on Jeopardy, because you literally never forget any date. You forget nothing. You remember every fact.
That's not true, but I had to ask you what that word meant.
Yeah.
I had, I had a wife, a mother, a daughter, and I'd never heard that term before. And since then, of course, I've heard it a lot, and it's something I should have known about. But anyway, sex never leaves our environment. It's always a big deal. And unfortunately, when you sell male doctors sex in their offices, that's not right. Is
that why all the drug reps look like cheerleaders?
They do. They're all gorgeous. The actual education for a drug rep is this. These are their official educational instructions. Is the first thing you do is you try to befriend the doctor. And then if that doesn't work, you go over and discuss the science. But first you need to befriend the doctor. And you know how you do that. It's pretty easy. Us guys are very susceptible, Anyway, I'm not going there.
Thanks.
But to get past the front staff, because most of them are women who deal with the secretarial and financial issues, it's mostly women. The way you get by them to get into the doctor's office, you bring donuts and pizza. Come on in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, Dr. McDougall, the more you talk, the more donations I'm getting. So thank you, Dave, and thank you, Lisa, and also for your nice comments. Here's a question from Renee. She wants to know if you have experience treating multiple myeloma with a whole food plant-based diet.
Again, we go back to my lung cancer example. There's no evidence that it's never been studied. multiple myeloma, I believe, is due to poisoning from environmental chemicals. That's how I think that you get multiple myeloma. And of course, you get the environmental chemicals when you eat high on the food chain. In other words, when you eat the animal foods, that's how you get the environmental chemicals in the largest concentration. So in that way, it's a dietary disease. But you destroy the bone marrow, the cells in the bone marrow, and they become out of control. They no longer obey important rules. They start dividing at a rapid rate, and especially different kinds of cells, and they overwhelm the system. So it goes back to what I told you before. Even if you cut off your arm, it's not going to grow back if you eat potatoes. But you ought to be on a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. What do you got to lose? Your doctor's not even going to ask you what you eat. They don't care. Everybody should be following a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. There are no exceptions.
Yep. Josh wants to know, does drinking out of aluminum cans cause Alzheimer's?
I think so. No, I think there's an association there, a very strong causal. You haven't heard the lecture. Most of you haven't heard it because this is a lecture that we asked you to pay for. It was about dementia and aging gracefully that I put on, and a selected number of people decided it was worth the money, and we did a private course with questions and answers. In fact, I think I did some segment of it on your show, Chef AJ, is how aluminum causes Alzheimer's. There's a new drug that just came out. It was in the paper last week. It costs like $50,000 for a treatment. It's obscene. And plus, the studies show it doesn't work. But the drug companies went back to the legislators and got it approved. Doesn't work. They did the same types of tests on this new drug, this new Alzheimer's drug, that they did on desferoxamine, which does work. Desferoxamine is a non-patentable drug. You can't make any money off of it. Research done in the 1980s took patients with Alzheimer's and gave them, and it's given intramuscularly, desferoxamine, and showed that over a year's course, the progression of the Alzheimer's compared to a placebo group was cut in half. They did twice as well by using desferoxamine, but it never has become a marketing drug because there's no money to be made. Yet this drug, which was in the headlines last week, doesn't work, costs like $50,000 a year. And because of pressure from the industry on our legislators, it's been approved. Crazy, huh? But anyway, aluminum causes Alzheimer's. It's due to aluminum poisoning. One source of aluminum is cans. But they tell us that they put shellac or some other kind of coating in aluminum cans so that the aluminum doesn't come out of it. That's what I've heard. I haven't done any thorough investigation to make sure it's true. But yeah, you should stop the aluminum. You stop the aluminum by not having aluminum pots and pans, or at least having them covered with non-stick surfaces. You stop the aluminum by not buying a whole bunch of products like some baking sodas, cake mixes, other types of manufactured products have aluminum in them. Let's see, aluminum, where else do you get aluminum? Tap waters, your drinking waters. In fact, one of the ways that it was discovered that aluminum causes Alzheimer's was in various population studies. They looked at their water sources and they compared that to the incidence of Alzheimer's, and they found a strong direct correlation. So let's see, aluminum foil. When Mary cooks, she puts parchment paper between the food and the aluminum foil. We don't come in contact with aluminum because we know it's toxic. And the other way that people come in contact with aluminum is through antiperspirants. They spray aluminum in their nose every morning when they apply the antiperspirant. And these are still for sale. They used to be #1 spray that was available for the armpits back about 15 years ago. And then the manufacturers discovered that the aluminum, and all antiperspirants are based on aluminum chloride. All of them have aluminum. Otherwise, they aren't antiperspirants. They looked at the science, the literature, and said, hey, we're spraying the cause of Alzheimer's in people's noses. And the olfactory lobe is the primary portal of entry of aluminum into the brain, not the gut. It's the nose. And so these almost went out of our marketplace, but they're back. They've got new sprays coming out. There you look up on Amazon, you'll see them, antiperspirants. Remember, all antiperspirants have aluminum chloride in them. All of them, or they're not antiperspirants. Now, this is different than deodorants. You can use deodorants. They don't stop perspiration. They just cover up the stink. Where do you get the stink from? From eating animals. So if you want to smell like a dead animal, you eat chicken and fish and beef and pork, and that's what you're going to stink like. And you can try and cover it up with perfumes and deodorants and colognes and everything you want, but you're not going to cover it up. You'll disguise it. If you don't get too close to somebody, you may mistakenly not smell these underlying odors, but they come through, particularly in your reproductive relationships. Whether or not you fall in love or are sexually attracted to somebody depends upon how you smell. Not how you look, but how you smell primarily. The perfume industry knows this. And the way you smell depends upon what you eat. And a lot of stinky people out there. You've been told by your friends and relatives, even though you try and cover it up. But you're not going to cover up the stink of eating animal foods. It goes all the way from bad breath to body odor to bad farts. Get over it. You eat like a vegetable, you smell like a vegetable. I'd rather smell like a vegetable.
That's funny. Andrea wants to know what your thoughts are on taking CBD oil.
I don't know. I've kind of avoided the whole marijuana subject because it's so stemmed in biases and it's not really my field. So the whole discussion of marijuana or its derivatives, I've kind of stayed away from. I know as much about it as you do.
I know nothing.
Well, I mean the general public, not you, AJ.
Yeah.
Obviously, I live in a state in the country where it's legal, and we have more marijuana shops than Starbucks. So it's obviously a drug that a lot of people like. But, the CBD has been touted as something that's very helpful. I don't think the science really supports that, but I'm not an expert on it. I haven't taken the trouble to figure it out. So you can do that. And anyway, there are a lot of drugs out there that are useful. So don't throw everything out. Don't throw the baby out with the wash-water is the expression. There are many medications that are extremely valuable, like antibiotics. Penicillin changed the world. And there are new AIDS drugs out there that change the history of somebody who gets an HIV infection. There's Viagra. There are a lot of good drugs out there.
Do you know where that expression, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, came from?
No, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, well, no, I used to be an advertising copywriter, and I love expressions. So I guess in the old days, people didn't bathe every day. Like they bathed, I don't know, once a month or once every 6 months. And they actually did it in the worst way because they'd have the head of the household, the father, go first, and they would save the baby for last. And by then, after everybody went, the bathwater was so dirty, they couldn't even see the baby. So they really should have bathed the baby first. That would make more sense. So that's where they got the saying.
I like it.
Don't throw the baby out. Well, you are known for so many great sayings. People want good news about their bad habits. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. I think next year there should be a McDougall calendar, and each month can be a recipe from Mary and one of your famous expressions.
I actually wrote up a Word document as to the epitaphs I'd like to see put on my gravestone. And there are a whole bunch of, I've got about 20 different sayings that I have I at least am semi-original on, and that I'd like to be known as. And, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. And people love to hear good news about their bad habits. Are a couple of them that I think many people associate with me.
Yep. Those are good ones. Have you ever heard of the Oshawa diet? Rosie wants to know.
No.
It looks like it's a macrobiotic diet, 10 days of rice, buckwheat, or barley as a starting detox and transition towards a vegan lifestyle. Why not do the Kempner diet?
Well, there are a lot of diets that approach what I recommend. I believe what I recommend is the best diet. And, the diet that's most likely for you to be helped and the diet that you're most likely to follow. That's what I believe. Otherwise, I'd teach you something else. But there are a lot of programs that come in a similar direction. You've got the pollo vegetarians, chicken vegetarians, the pesco vegetarians, the fish vegetarians. That's an improvement. You've got the what's the hunter-gatherer diet, paleo diet. They gave up. They at least got dairy out of the diet, even though they load you up with so much animal protein, you get just sick from the protein. There are a lot of approaches, and then of course you get down to the standard vegetarian diet, which includes eggs and milk, but at least they gave up the meat. And then you get to a vegan diet, and that's getting closer, except you got to give up the oil to be really healthy. And, that's why I call this a starch-based diet. I want you to be able to focus on what you're supposed to be eating. Even if you eat a starch-based diet and you have a little bit of birthday cake or chicken once a month, or, you're going to do well. But you've got to get across the message of the starch-based diet. The reason I teach it as a vegan diet is not only do I think it's really important from the point of view of animals, but I know people don't follow moderation. And if they start allowing a little bit into their world, they can't stop. They just plain and simple, one piece of birthday cake is the birthday cake every day. One In-N-Out burger. They say those are the best. I never had the experience, but one In-N-Out burger, you can never stop. So don't do it. If you're like I am, when you realize that things that have been destructive in my life, and we're not going to go through many of them, if not any of them, I learned I had to stay away from 100%, and you should too. And that's why I teach you the McDougall diet, which is a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. No animal foods, no free oils, no nuts and seeds and avocados if you want to lose weight. If you want to gain weight, you have quite a few nuts and seeds and avocados.
Absolutely. Mona wants to know, were you an actual nurse or were you a tech? Because you said you were a nurse.
I was a tech. I was an operating room tech. I didn't have nurses training. But I was an OR tech. I did circulated, and I also handed instruments, and I did it on thousands of people. I spent my whole career, pre-med and medical school, working at a hospital. Weekends and Christmas breaks and so on. So, but yeah, I was an operating room tech.
Cool. People are asking if you can bring back the baseball hats that said it's the food.
I don't want to talk to Heather about that. Those sell pretty well.
I have the T-shirt. I always wear it backwards though, because I wear it with the Dr. McDougall in front. I don't know why, but I do.
Well, that's something that we take some originality in. I know there are other people who have, think that we stole it from them. That's not true. I can't think of anybody, any place, anywhere that has been using the term as long as we have. And so we tell you it's copyrighted. It's the food. And if other people want to use the same statement, that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's so funny because I posted over the weekend, all my, because I do eat a starch-based diet. Most of my calories are from starch. The vegetables are such a small portion compared in terms of calories or volume. And, you still get people like, it's like, oh, raise my blood sugar. I can't, it drives me crazy because they don't even try,
Well, that's why they never get well.
Yeah.
But if you maintain the beliefs that are taught, for example, like from the American Diabetic Association or the American Heart Association, if you say that, well, they've got to be the experts, they've got to be right. One thing I can guarantee you is you're never, ever going to get well. Just like that, I didn't complete that story about this 60 Minutes session on Ozempic, which is basically what they're there to advertise. They had a medical expert on there, which is what members of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine wrote me last night and said they objected to so much, that told people they could never get well. The problem with obesity was genetics. So don't even try. You got to take our drug because you're never going to get well. It's in your genes. And that's what they objected to. Well, excuse me, then how do you explain the fact that before 1980, there were no overweight Chinese at all, zero? In 2 billion people in the Asian population, nobody was overweight. Nobody had type 2 diabetes. I remember that. I was alive. I was watching. That kind of propaganda that 60 Minutes put on has got to be stopped. I went after 60 Minutes in November of 2011 when Walter Isaacson wrote his biography on Steve Jobs. And if you want to look that up, you want to see the lecture I gave and how I went after 60 Minutes. And I used a segment of their interview with Walter Isaacson. I think you'll enjoy it. It's Why Did Steve Jobs Die? Is the name of the lecture. And it talks about how he was mistreated and how it was all the things that were said in his book were not true. And the things believed by his doctors hurt him, not helped him. And 60 Minutes has never responded, even though they must have seen it because over 1 million people have seen that lecture. Go to YouTube, put in Steve Jobs and McDougall. You'll have a lot of fun. That was a great lecture. Why did Steve Jobs die? Taking on 60 Minutes, which I'd love to do again. Who knows? Maybe the American College of Lifestyle Medicine will get behind me, or at least involve me in telling them how they need to do it to straighten this nonsense out that went out last night. You're condemned. Don't even think about losing weight. It's your genes. You've got to take Ozempic. Oh, by the way, Ozempic sponsors 60 Minutes or one of the other GLP-1 agonist does. It's not Ozempic. I think they have another brand. Anyways, it's crooked. It's money. You're getting screwed because of it. Your family's dying. You're suffering. They're taking your money away. They're lying to you. I'd love to have the chance to tell them that. And I do every Monday on your show.
Yep. With the drug, are they also suggesting people make dietary changes or just saying, no, just take the drug?
No, diet doesn't work. They clearly told you last night the diet.
Yeah. Well, are you going to cover any of the weight loss surgeries next month? And I don't mean the traditional one, gastric bypass, but there's some surgeries that people get that are not as permanent, like they don't cut the parts out. Like, I don't know if you heard of the one where there's like a tube that goes to the outside. So you eat whatever you want, and then you just get rid of it.
Oh, that's a cool. I've not heard about that one. Sounds
like no, I saw it on a BBC documentary. I'll send you the information because you basically
they have done so much to cause malabsorption in the intestinal tract. They've had you swallow balloons or little tiny balloons and big balloons, and they do something procedure called the sleeve where they cut out a portion of the stomach to make it tiny. They do bypasses where they cut the small intestine out, most of it. And that's where you absorb your calories, is in the small intestine. So they bypass the small intestine. These people are sick. They're never well again. And I'm going to go through them and talk about those. And you know what I'm going to compare it with? Another way that people used to cause malabsorption. It was popular between 1830 and 1920. during the Victorian age. During the Victorian age, if you look at the female body, they wore corsets and they did everything they could to look thin, including causing malabsorption by eating tapeworms. And I'm going to cover that. Tapeworms used to be, because this worm would grow in your intestinal tract, which would eat part of your food. And I'm going to compare bariatric surgery to tapeworms. They work similar. I'm going to compare Ozempic and those kinds of drugs to the make yourself sick, low carb keto diets, and to cancer chemotherapy, and to getting chronically infected, like with the novel virus. I'm going to do that next month in your February 1st of the Monday month. I'm going to do a whole lecture on it. Yeah, so, why not have tapeworms? Why don't we bring tapeworms back? Well, why don't we just get people chronically infected with viruses? Why don't we just put people on chemotherapy drugs? I shouldn't say that too loud because somebody will figure out how to make some money off of it and do it. What do you think?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre. There's so much ignorance out there. And again, it all comes down to money. We'll destroy the planet, which is, one of my most concerns these days because of money. I sometimes think, don't these bankers, don't these billionaires, don't they have children and grandchildren too? What are they thinking?
Somebody's posting a question. I just lost it from Candace, something about hair growth. Is there any foods or supplements that could help?
Yeah. Now, well, there's supplements. There are anti-testosterone drugs like minoxidil. Minoxidil used to be a blood pressure pill that you took as a pill. It caused hair growth. But now minoxidil is a lotion you put on your scalp, which is anti-testosterone. So minoxidil works. There are also other anti-testosterone drugs that are prescribed for hair growth because testosterone is one of the factors involved in losing your hair and causing male pattern baldness. Male pattern baldness. This is typical men lose this part of their hair, and I got lots of hair. It's going, but not in the way it does with most men, and that's because I eat a good diet. I think so. I think it's probably a little bit genetics, but I think that my hair has been saved because I have eaten well since 1977. And in my book called the McDougall Program, 12 Days to Dynamic Health, which has never been given away free, you'll always have to buy that book. It's still held in the list for Penguin Putnam. They still own the rights and they still sell it and they still make money off of it. In there, in the back section is an article about, can you grow your hair back? And the way this occurred was I was working in a medical office building and there was a dermatologist in the building with me. And he was a friend, but he also joked with me a lot. He brought me this article out of Oncology and Dermatology. That was the name of the periodical, Oncology and Dermatology. Brought me this article by a Dr. Inaba. And this is discussed in the McDougall's Medicine Challenge, or no, it's discussed in the McDougall Program, 12 Days to Dynamic Health. So Dr. Inaba, he wrote this article entitled, Can You Grow Your Hair Back? He's a Japanese doctor. And what he noted was, prior to World War II, there was no baldness in Japan. No male pattern baldness. And then after the war, when people started switching to the Western diet, male pattern baldness started to appear, became more common. And Dr. Inaba talked about the hormone changes that take place when you switch from a starch-based diet, like the Japanese diet is traditionally, it's a diet based on rice, to the Western diet, which is becoming a more common diet among the Asians. He talked about the hormone change that take place in the body. And so I started to believe this man. And he thought you could grow your hair back if you changed back to a healthy diet. And I was living in Hawaii then. We used to go to Waikiki a lot. And I had a chance to see various Japanese people. I had a chance to see the tourists who came from Japan, the elderly tourists, people in their 70s and 80s. And they had full sets of hair, the men did. But I was also taking care of an American Japanese population of people who were raised in Hawaii on the Western diet. They were fat and greasy and bald, just like whites and blacks. Yeah, it's a dietary disease. It involves genetics, but it can be stopped. It can be prevented with a good diet. Whether or not you can grow your hair back, I don't know. I wouldn't say I have any experience with that. But as far as preventing, the world observation tells you that this is not a part of normal living for healthy people on starch-based diets. They don't go bald, period. Now, there's another kind of hair loss that you actually brought up for me, maybe you remember the name of it. It was Joel Furman.
Yeah, something like fluvian or something.
Yeah, I learned from that.
I'm so honored that you watch my show. I can't believe that you even watch my show.
And Dr. Furman occasionally has something worthwhile to say. Anyway, he's on our side of the fence as far as the camp goes. Dr. Furman is. There are many things I disagree with him about. But I learned from him about this kind of hair loss, which occurs, I don't know, every 12 months or something, or you lose 12% of your hair. So 12 is sometimes involved in it. And it's just naturally you cycle and you lose some hair, particularly women notice it. And it's a normal part of being alive. It's not anything abnormal. You never become bald. You just have some hair loss. Now, prior to hearing Dr. Furman's discussion of this on your show, I had observed that my patients, women, would talk about hair loss that occurs when their hormones changed a lot. And this would be when they go through puberty, teenagers, and when they got pregnant, when they ended their pregnancy, when they started breastfeeding, they ended breastfeeding, when they went through menopause. Whenever they went through hormone changes, I observed in my patients that they came in complaining of hair loss. Never did they go bald. They just had an increased amount in normal hair exchange, which Dr. Furman described.
That's great. I can't find it because my chat goes quicker than everyone else's, but someone commented that Roy Swank, who was one of your mentors, he actually allowed some lean meat and some oil, and because this person, I guess, has had MS.
Right. He allowed fish oil, didn't allow saturated fat, no animal fat. This is what his diet was based on, was getting rid of animal fat. And he did allow some lean meats in his diet because they're lower in fat. I'll tell you a story I don't think I've ever told before. But, I was really close to Dr. Swank. In fact, he came and ran his MS program twice at my clinic at St. Lucia Hospital. And, we socialized together. I have pictures of him the last time I saw him in 2004 when we visited his home. Anyway, he was one of my mentors. He was one of the people who really served to give me the foundation of what I do today. And there was a meeting that we had. This is the part that I've never told. Not that there's any reason I shouldn't tell it. But I wanted to take over Dr. Swank's practice. Nobody else would. Okay. He had offered it to the MS Society, various other doctors. Nobody would take over his practice. And he was like in his early 90s and still practicing. And he didn't want to see his patients abandoned. So I told Dr. Swank that I would do it. I would take his patients. And that goes into a couple other stories. One is I do have a contract between Dr. Swank and myself. I have the paper, or at least I have a copy of the paper. The agreement that we made that I would continue his work. Okay, the other thing that you might be interested in knowing is there was a meeting held in Portland, Oregon, between the board of the Swank organization and the other important members of the Swank organization, and Dr. Swank and myself. And it was at one of the hotels in Portland, Oregon, and they served roast beef sandwiches for lunch. I was shocked, but I shouldn't have been, because I knew what his diet recommended. It was, beef, not maybe it was a low-fat beef, who knows. Anyway, that's what happened. The other thing that's kind of interesting that happened is Roy Swank was the reason I left St. Helena Hospital. I worked at St. Helena Hospital for 16 years. It's one of the most famous hospitals in the world. It was the second leading cardiac surgery hospital in California. It's in the Napa Valley. It's a Seventh-day Adventist hospital. So it was based on a religion that taught importance of diet and lifestyle, particularly a vegetarian, almost vegan diet by their founder, Ellen White, in the early 1800s. She taught that. They're supposed to live by those principles. Well, anyways, as Dr. Swank was retiring, I suggested that we move his practice down to my clinic. And I told the administration this is what I wanted to do. It made all the sense in the world. We needed more patients. We're a hospital. Hospitals take care of sick, needy people. And we're an Adventist hospital, so it makes sense that we would take care of them with dietary therapies, one of the main principles. You would think it was a no-brainer for them to eagerly accept Dr. Swank's patients into my program at St. Helena Hospital. Well, the first thing I got was a notice from the administrator of our program. She told me that they weren't going to do it. I said, why don't you want to do it? Well, we don't want MS patients. We don't want to be known as an MS hospital. And I said, why? I said, because they don't get better. It's like cancer patients. They don't get better either. So nobody wants to be associated with the stigma of taking care of patients that don't get better. I said, is that the reason? And I think it was in part, but the real reason was they didn't make money. Anyway, my contract was coming up at St. Helena Hospital. And I asked for a meeting with the head of the whole hospital, who happened to be an obese woman, probably irrelevant. But I had a meeting and asked for a meeting with her. And I couldn't get a meeting for a month and a half. My contract was due in 5 days. I wrote void over the top and put it on the administrator of our program's desk. I said, I'm out of here. I had a meeting the next day. And after listening to me for a few minutes, they said, we're never going to change your mind, are we? I said, you're never going to change my mind. I'm leaving. Now, there may be rumors that St. Helena Hospital kicked me out. I don't know. I've only heard that a couple of times. But the truth of the matter is I would not associate myself anymore with a hospital that had that kind of attitude, that they wouldn't take care of sick people because of the money.
You've always marched to the beat of your own drum. That's why we love and respect you so much.
And you know what? When I left St. Helena Hospital, they didn't think I was going to survive. They thought it financially, business-wise, that I couldn't do it without them. I tripled the census on my patient population, the first program I ran at a resort in Santa Rosa, California. And I cut the price of the program. You see, I was paying for floor space, which I had to share with the other departments of the hospital. So what they were charging me to run the program there was, this whole administrative thing. They only paid me a salary, which was minuscule. I was making my money selling books back then. I didn't really care what they paid me. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of things. I have a few hard feelings, but I have some very good feelings. For 16 years, I had a wonderful staff, and we took care of over 3,000 people. And, I got to know some interesting doctors there. I got to learn a lot about the medical business and how it runs and what it's all about. And it's a good experience for me. But after 16 years, I left, spent the next 18 years at the resort in Santa Rosa, California. And I spent the last 3 years running an internet program. And Chef AJ, every time we change, we do better. The resort program was far better than the hospital-based program. People used to not want to come to the hospital because they thought about St. Lucia Hospital as a place where people went who were sick. And they wanted to go to a place where people went to get healthy. They couldn't make the connection between a hospital and good health. They knew more than I did. But each and every time we've improved the program. Now, when we're running it by the internet, a telemedicine program, it is far more effective, far more enjoyable, at a third of the cost. Any of you who want to sign up for this 12-day program, I encourage you to do it. You're going to kick yourself. You're going to say, I wish I'd have done this years before. We're going to run one this month, and I think it's the 13th of January 2023. But you can get in touch with us and find out the dates. Be the best thing you ever did. You'll have more attention, more time with Mary and I and Heather than you ever imagined. You'll have more time with our instructors, more intimate time, and we'll have a better chance to get you better in your own environment. Good grief, when people left the hospital or the resort, they had to go home to a kitchen that was still stocked with all the garbage. They really didn't know how to cook because we fed them. Our chefs fed them. Now we go into your home. We have support specialists. They go into your home and help you plan your meals and figure out how to cook them. We check on your blood pressure and your blood sugar and et cetera, et cetera. This is such an improvement as far as welfare, as far as outcome goes. And we get, we've got the data. We get better weight losses, better adherence to the program, more people off medications than we ever did before. So I don't know how we can improve on what we're doing right now, but there may be. Anyways, it's a very successful program, our telemedicine program. You find out about it by going to the website, drmcdougall.com.
Yep. And everything is below in the show notes. And I love your program.
And by the way, Chef AJ teaches there.
Yeah, I get to do those cooking demos. They're fantastic.
Well,
and it's easier because you don't have to make the samples.
Yeah, you know how the relationship is. You've done enough live classes. You know how it works out with over the internet. And there are very, very many positive things about doing it this way.
Well, Dr. McDougall, you are a treasure. We thank you so much. I mean, people, we could stay on all day, but I want to respect your time. And I actually want to eat my giant potato for lunch because I have another guest too, Dr. McDougall. I don't know if you know this doctor, but I think you would really like him. He was my doctor in the desert. He's an Adventist. He's vegan. He's quadruple board certified in internal medicine, sleep medicine, critical care, and pulmonary medicine. And he's actually has his own YouTube channel. He's a superstar. He has 1.5 million YouTube followers.
Does he fly an airplane?
Well, he's best friends with Dr. Neil Nedley, so he might. I don't know.
So it's not Dr. Neil Nedley.
It's not Dr. Neil Nedley, but it's his best friend.
I've known Neil for many years, and he's a pilot, just like Mary and I are both pilots. And anyway, that's why I wanted a clue as to whether it's him. Who is it? Who's the doctor's name?
His name is Dr. Roger Schwelt, and I really admire him. And I think you would like his YouTube channel. He might be somebody you'd like to interview. He was on the front lines with COVID, being both critical care and pulmonary, and he's a wonderful person. So maybe check him out sometime.
Ask him about his business practices and how he makes his living.
Well, I was his patient. He's just a real straight up honest doctor. He doesn't do, he's critical care and pulmonary. He's not doing, procedures.
So he does the diet thing as a side business.
Well, he's been vegan. He is,
I'm just curious because that's the reason that, nothing personal about this doctor, but that's the reason that most doctors don't go into this kind of business is because it's difficult to make money. The 7-minute office visit ended by a prescription is a really good way to make money. when you have to talk to people and spend time with them. You get paid for the same office visit, same amount of money. Most doctors have just thrown up their hands and said, I can't make a living doing this. I was fortunate enough to write some national best-selling books, that kept my children, in shoes. Otherwise, I'd have starved to death too. But I'd find it interesting, to find out, how do you make your living? It sounds like he makes his living doing critical care. And,
pulmonary medicine. He's a regular doctor.
And that as a side love, he does diet therapy as a side business. Anyway, nothing personal. I just wanted to throw that out. Any doctor who tries to practice this way, I need to know, how do you make your money? Because you're not making it by doing the right thing. And that's the problem, is doing the right thing doesn't pay financially. It pays in other ways, and who knows? Things are changing, but I want to leave you with the fact that I'm very optimistic, and I really am. I'm not just saying those words. I'm really optimistic about what the next few years bring us. I can see some changes coming that I've only dreamed about for the last 46, 47 years. Thank you, AJ. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And maybe 2023 will be the year for you, Dr. McDougall.
Well, every year's been good. And part of that has been having good friends like you and having a partner in life for the last 51 years. Mary.
Yeah, well, we hope she'll come back to. Remember, we're still hoping one day she'll either show us her pantry or cook a recipe for us, because people have been asking.
She's happy to. You just got to talk to her. She'll do it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. McDougall. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back at 2 p.m. for Dr. Roger Schwelt. He is going to be talking about diet, fasting, hydrotherapy, and sunlight, and how to achieve health in this new year. And also, 11 a.m. tomorrow, Dr. Doug Lyle, Straight Talk is the name of his new show. Take care, everyone. Happy New Year, and thanks so much.